I was slicing roasted turkey for my parents when my sister burst out laughing. She held my laptop high like a trophy screen turned toward the entire room. Guess what, everyone? Our little antique girl has $12 million sitting in her account, just tucked away, like Grandma's china. I froze, fork in midair, wine glass trembling in my mother's hand. The entire dining room, 20 people in total, turned to stare at me like I'd just confessed to murder. No one asked if it was true. No one asked how. They all asked one thing. Why didn't you give it to Lorelai? And that was the moment I realized I had never been a daughter in this family. I had always been an ATM with good manners, a quiet wallet with nice shoes. For years, I'd paid their mortgage, $5,000 every month, quietly, without asking for thanks. But that night in the middle of mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce, they looked me in the eye and said my sister deserved it more. She had a weaker constitution, they said, a more sensitive soul. And me, I was cold, calculating, and unattached. So I made a decision. I walked out. And the next morning, I canceled every automatic payment I had ever set up for them. If they wanted me to be heartless, I'd show them what silence truly felt like. My name is Serafina Wadsworth, and for most of my life I've been invisible to the people who should have loved me first. Before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments so I know you're listening. Or let me know where you're watching from. I love to see how far my story can reach. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, because some stories, especially the ones that start in the shadows, deserve to be heard. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. My name is Serafina Wadsworth, but everyone's always called me Sarah shorter, easier to forget. I'm 60 now, a seasoned appraiser of fine antiques with a quiet reputation in certain East Coast circles. But long before any of that, I was just a shadow in a spotless house near Lake Tahoe, a child who learned early that being seen wasn't the same as being loved. My family wasn't abusive, at least not in the ways people expect. We had monogram towels dinner served at 6 and a pantry organized like a museum archive. My father Theodore was a meticulous man who balanced the checkbook like a priest reading scripture. My mother Evelyn wore silk blouses and pearls even on cleaning days, and she cleaned constantly. Our house smelled of bleach, always. Not lemon or lavender or anything welcoming, just bleach. Cold, clinical antiseptic. That smell still makes the back of my throat tighten. Then there was Lorelai. My little sister was born 2 months early, tiny and soft, and struggling to breathe. From the moment she came home wrapped in hospital linen and hope, she became the sun our family orbited. She was fragile. The word whispered with reverence. I was 10 when she was born, old enough to understand that her weakness rewrote the laws of our household. Anytime I so much as coughed or sneezed, I was deemed a contagion risk and packed off to stay with Aunt Margaret or Grandma Eleanor. It didn't matter if I felt fine. We can't risk Lorelai getting sick, Mom would say, tightening my coat like I was being shipped to Siberia. Sarah's so independent. She'll be fine. I heard her say that once in the hallway, her voice muffled but clear enough to brand itself in my memory. I would be fine. Therefore, I could be forgotten. Birthday parties came and went without cakes. One year, I got a wrapped set of markers Mom picked up from the drugstore on her way home. Lorelai, meanwhile, had 3 guests, a themed cake, and party hats, even though she was running a mild fever. I learned not to ask for anything. That was easier. At Grandma Eleanor's, things were different. Her house was smaller, warmer. It smelled of old books and wood polish instead of bleach. She collected antiques not to show off, but to preserve to understand. Ornate chairs, porcelain figurines, hand-stitched tapestries. I was mesmerized. I would spend hours arranging her little objects, lining up tiny drawer handles from different centuries, polishing brass until I could see my face warped in their curves. She taught me to tell mahogany from walnut Regency from Victorian. She saw something in me and didn't ask me to dim it. But one day, Lorelai visited while I was staying over. She saw me holding an antique pocket watch, a gold piece with floral etching and tiny initials carved inside the lid. She didn't even touch it. just backed away, holding her breath, eyes wide like I'd waved a snake in her face. "That's dirty," she cried. "It could make me sick." Mom showed up less than an hour later, took the watch from my hands, wrapped it in tissue like it was a used tissue, and told me I was selfish, that I should have known better than to expose Lorelai to dusty things. She stripped my corner of the guest room, my rose-scented sanctuary, and scrubbed every surface with bleach while I sat on the porch staring into the dusk. That night I realized in our house, if you were healthy, you were dangerous. If you were quiet, you were ignored. And if you were me, you were dispensable. After that, I withdrew into silence. I learned to eat quickly, speak softly, disappear at will. The only place I felt safe was my own bedroom, my rose room, with pale pink wallpaper and drawer sachets that Lorelai couldn't tolerate. She wouldn't come near it. That meant it was mine. That room became my fortress, my laboratory, my gallery. While Lorelai got extra desserts and handwritten notes in her lunchbox, I retreated into that room and arranged the few antique trinkets Grandma Eleanor slipped me, small things easily hidden, a silver thimble, a cracked cameo, a tiny Delft vase. I cleaned them, studied them, cherished them. They were like me, delicate, overlooked, and if you really paid attention, valuable. Some children are born to be adored. Some are born to adore quietly from the sidelines. I learned early which I was. I didn't know then that this quiet passion, this love for things buried and misunderstood, would one day be the very thing that set me free. I entered high school with a quiet fire inside me. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I was brilliant enough, they'd finally see me. Not just look at me, but really see me. So I poured myself into everything. I aced every class, joined the debate team, became a staff writer for the school paper. I stayed up reading about Renaissance interiors while my classmates were at football games. I entered science fairs not for prizes, but for recognition, for a look of pride from my parents. In 11th grade, I won first place at the statewide art restoration competition. My project was a meticulous reconstruction of a Regency-style escritoire, complete with era-appropriate pigments and period brasswork. When I brought the certificate home, thick parchment gold embossed, I placed it right in the center of the dinner table. But Lorelai had a headache that night. She barely touched her chicken and complained of dizziness. My father got up to fetch her ginger ale. My mother fussed with a cool towel. The certificate was pushed aside, hidden under a pile of napkins and tissues. No one read it. No one said a word. I ate my dinner silently, cheeks burning. Later that semester, I had a winter violin recital. I'd been practicing for months. My mother had even promised to come. But an hour before the performance, I got a message from Dad. "Lorelai needs to see the doctor. She's wheezing again. You understand, right?" I nodded to no one, put on my dress, and played my solo to an empty family section. Afterward, friends hugged their moms. I walked alone to the campus library and checked out a book on 18th century frescoes. I couldn't go home yet. Then came the SAT. I scored a perfect 1600. I printed the results, slid them into a clear folder, and laid them on the table like a trophy. Lorelai peeked at the numbers, eyebrows raised. "Did you apply to the same schools as me?" she asked. "No," I replied. I applied on my own. Mom glanced at the paper, blinked, and said, "That's great, honey. Just make sure you help Lorelai study too." That's when I knew even my success wasn't mine alone. It was expected to be shared, diluted, handed off to the one they truly cared about. My accomplishments weren't fuel for my future. They were firewood to warm someone else's comfort. So I stopped asking. I applied to 12 colleges on my own, drafting essays on library computers and filling out forms in the back booth of Agnes's bakery, the only place I could think. I didn't tell anyone when the acceptance letters came, especially not when I got the full ride to Boston University. It felt like a secret key. The morning I left, I didn't make a scene. I just placed the envelope with the university seal next to the cereal box. I rolled my suitcase down the stairs. No one looked up from their plates. Grandma Eleanor was waiting by the curb. She handed me a small envelope before I stepped onto the bus. Inside was $600 in bills worn from years of folding. "Start your real life," she said, "where people see you." As the bus pulled away, I looked out the window but didn't wave. I whispered to my reflection, If they won't see me, I'll light my own way. After graduating summa cum laude from Boston University, I didn't land a glamorous job or leap into a glamorous life. I began in the back room of Hawthorne and Sons, a respected but aging auction house in the heart of Boston. I cataloged furniture, took measurements, brushed off cobwebs from wooden beams no one had touched in decades. No one fought for this job. It was quiet, unassuming, and required an eye most didn't possess. For me, it felt like home. One afternoon, I was deep in the storage cellar when I noticed a table shoved in a far corner. A plain tag tied to one leg read reproduction. Unsigned. Estimate $800. But the leg, slim bowed with shell-carved knees and the faint inlay across the apron, told a different story. I knelt, tracing my fingers across the grain beneath the tabletop, following the old, shallow scratches only seen in authentic period pieces. The brass brackets weren't modern imitations. They were worn smooth with age. I brought it up with Lawrence, my supervisor. He looked over his glasses and said, "You've been here, 6 weeks? It's a nice guess, but let's not overstep." I asked for a few days to prove it. He shrugged and said, "Do what you want. Just don't drag me into it." I spent 3 nights cross-referencing furniture catalogs from the 1800s, comparing construction styles and hand-drawn ledger illustrations. I found an old estate document from an English noble family featuring a similar piece, the measurements nearly identical. I wrote a report, sourced photographs, and matched wood samples. The table sold at auction for $52,000. Lawrence didn't say thank you, but from that day on he called me by name instead of the new girl. That was enough. With the commission bonus, I bought myself a gift, a deep blue Edwardian sapphire necklace with a hand-forged silver clasp. Not flashy, but unmistakably valuable to those who understood what they were looking at. I wore it to Christmas dinner that year. Mom looked at it while ladling gravy and said, "Don't wear fake jewelry, Sarah. It makes you look cheap." I smiled, didn't explain, didn't correct her. I wasn't hurt. Not really. But something in me shifted. It was the first time I realized I no longer needed their approval. I was building a life they didn't understand and never would. Around that time, my parents began mentioning problems with the mortgage. Interest rates had changed. Some medical bills had stacked up. Lorelei's student loans, I gathered, were significant, though I'd never been told directly. So I started transferring $5,000 every month through a brokerage conduit. No return address. No name attached. It was enough to keep them afloat, and I had more than enough to spare. I didn't want credit. I didn't even want thanks. I just wanted them to be okay. One evening, over roast lamb and dry red wine, my mother looked at me and said, "It's good your Aunt Margaret's still helping us a bit. Lord knows Sarah's still working that bakery job or whatever it is." I swallowed a laugh. I hadn't seen a register or an apron in over a decade. From then on, I learned to play a part. I wore antique pieces but claimed they were vintage replicas. I answered vaguely when asked what I did for work. I let them assume I scraped by. It kept the peace. It kept them uninterested, which in my family was the safest place to be. But all that hiding, all that peacekeeping, it was a rope I didn't know was wrapping around my own throat. What I thought was invisibility turned out to be silence that others would fill with whatever served them best. And soon they'd use that silence to turn me into someone I no longer recognized. Thanksgiving came with a phone call from Mom. She said her back had been bothering her and that she couldn't cook this year. "We'll just do something simple," she said. "Maybe you could take care of the food." I went all in. I hired a private catering team out of Napa, ordered a heritage turkey wild mushroom stuffing, roasted root vegetables, and Bordeaux from 1982. Everything timed, everything plated to perfection. I didn't do it to show off. I did it because I was finally in a place where I could. I also had a live auction running in London that day. A Baroque painting I'd evaluated weeks earlier was going up for sale, and I needed to monitor the bids. I brought my laptop, planning to check it discreetly from the corner of the dining room. At some point, I stepped into the kitchen to check on a sauce that wasn't reducing properly. When I returned, Lorelei was in my chair laughing. "Oh my God, you guys," she said, turning the laptop to the center of the table. "You won't believe this." On the screen, bold as daylight, was my company dashboard. My account balance read /12/431 $900. Underneath rows of transactions scrolled client contracts in six figures, a recent painting sale of 1.2 million quarterly profit reports. The room fell silent. My father put down his wine glass. My mother clutched her chest like she'd been struck. Every cousin, aunt, and uncle around the table stared at me like I'd grown horns. "You had all that money," Lorelei said, her voice rising. "And you let us struggle. You let Mom worry about bills while you sat on this." I stood frozen, my hand still holding the wine spoon. "My mother broke first. You watched your own family nearly lose the house, and you said nothing. What were you planning to do with all that money? Be buried with it?" My father chimed in tone, flat but loaded. "Lorelei needs help. She's had it hard since birth. She's not like you, Sarah. She doesn't have your luck. She doesn't have your life." Lorelei added, her lower lip trembling in manufactured fragility. "I'm not strong like you. I've always needed more." I looked at them. All of them. And something inside me split wide open. I set down my wine. My voice came out low, steady. "Do you remember when I had the flu at 10 and you sent me to Grandma's so Lorelei wouldn't catch it, when I won that statewide competition, and you never even looked at the certificate because Lorelei had a stomachache? When I got a perfect SAT score and Mom asked me to tutor Lorelei instead of congratulating me, they didn't answer. They shifted in their seats. Uncomfortable. I've been sending $5,000 every month for 10 years to help with the mortgage. I didn't sign the transfers because I didn't need you to thank me. I just didn't want you to lose the house." I paused. "But now I wonder if I should have just let the bank take it." Lorelei blinked. "That wasn't from Aunt Margaret." "No," I said. "It never was." I looked around the table, 20 relatives who'd never asked what I did, who assumed I was scraping by, who never noticed when I stopped coming to birthdays, to christenings, to family brunches, because I'd grown tired of being talked over and talked around. You didn't see me when I was building a career, when I was exhausted from working 3 jobs and studying at night. You didn't see me when I succeeded. But now that you see a number on a screen, suddenly, I matter. I walked to the end of the table, closed my laptop, picked up my bag, my real Chanel, not the knockoff Mom once assumed, and turned back to them. "Don't expect the next transfer," I said. "From now on, you're on your own." Then I walked out the front door of my parents' home in Tahoe. Not as a daughter, not even as a relative, just as someone who finally understood that silence had never protected me. It had only made it easier for them to sharpen the knives. After the Thanksgiving dinner imploded, I flew back to Philadelphia expecting silence. I thought they'd be angry, that maybe they'd stew for a while, eventually let it go. But my phone buzzed before I even landed. Messages from my mother, from my father, from Aunt Susan and Uncle Bob. All of them wanted to talk like adults. None of them asked if I was okay. None of them apologized for the public ambush. They simply wanted to know when I would set up a fund for Lorelei. At first, I ignored them. Then came the Instagram post. Lorelei wrote a long caption under a filtered photo of the Tahoe Lake. She never said my name, but she didn't need to. Someone close to me, she began, "Let our family drown in debt while secretly sitting on millions. Medical bills, mortgage, stress, Mom's health, all while she lived in luxury and left us behind." She used just enough vagueness to maintain plausible deniability, but also included just enough detail, antiques, a sapphire necklace, the town of Tahoe, to point a very clear finger. Comments flooded in. Hashtags popped up. Hashtag sister millionaire. Hashtag family betrayal. People dissected the story, found photos of me in panel discussions, tagged my company, and demanded explanations. They called me heartless, cold, a fake. Then came the article. A Boston gossip blog ran a headline that practically screamed, "Antique millionaire abandons ailing family." They rehashed Lorelei's story, added fictional quotes, and framed me as a social climbing recluse who refused to help her aging parents or sickly sister. They even included a blurred photo of my building in Philadelphia. Days later, a longtime client from Charleston canceled a major contract. In his email, he was polite but clear. "This has become too public, too personal. My legal team advises we distance ourselves." I barely had time to process the fallout before Aunt Susan scheduled a family Zoom. 12 boxes appeared on the screen, faces from my childhood, from awkward holidays, from funerals and weddings. People I hadn't spoken to in years. Uncle Bob spoke first. "We've kept your secrets all these years," he said, as if I were a criminal. "Now it's your turn to think about the family, about legacy, about fairness." I turned off my camera, closed the laptop, blocked every single one of them. But they weren't finished. Clara, my assistant, forwarded me a message from a prospective client. He'd received an anonymous email claiming I had falsified a past appraisal. Attached was a screenshot of a poorly doctored invoice with my name on it. The allegations were baseless, but they were detailed enough to cause doubt. Then I received a letter from the Association of Professional Appraisers, an official notice, a request for audit. Suddenly, 2 decades of painstaking credibility were hanging by a thread. I closed the Philadelphia office, not permanently, just long enough to breathe. But in the silence of my apartment, everything echoed. The fridge hum, the heater clicks, the weight of a war I hadn't chosen but could no longer avoid. I opened the box that held my Edwardian necklace. I didn't reach for it. I just stared. I had once worn it to remind myself I mattered. Now I wasn't so sure I did. When the phone rang, I almost didn't answer. But when I saw the hospital's number, my breath caught. Eleanor had been rushed in. She wasn't responsive. I stood alone in my living room, everything dim, and I felt it. The unraveling, not loud or dramatic, just steady and cold, like an old painting's frame cracking in silence. I left for Boston the next morning, needing something familiar, something before all this. The city greeted me with fog and grit. My old office, 3 floors above the Italian noodle shop where I used to eat during my first year at Hawthorne & Sons, looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just grown too much to fit inside it. The moment I stepped inside, the stale air greeted me like an old secret. A thin layer of dust coated the edges of the frames. The windows were slightly fogged. The air smelled faintly of garlic from below. It used to make me hungry. That day, it made my stomach turn. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and saw the latest eruption. Lorelai had moved on from Instagram. She was now on Twitter. There, she posted a photo of a supposed contract between me and a European auction house. It claimed I had accepted a $350,000 under-the-table payment to inflate a painting's valuation. The signature was mine, or at least a version of it. The tweet spread fast. Art forums picked it up. A popular blog posted, "Appraisal industry faces ethics reckoning. What we can learn from SW." Within hours, I received another notice from the association. I was to suspend all valuation activities pending investigation. I didn't cry at first. I just sat still. But that night, I opened the folder in my phone where I'd saved old messages from my mother. One said, "We nearly lost your sister, and now we've lost our dignity too. Are you happy, Sarah?" Another read, "Don't come to the Christmas service unless you're ready to make this right." On Lorelai's post, someone had commented, "Women like her shouldn't be allowed to have families. They ruin them." That was when the tears came, not for the business, not for the lies, but because deep down I realized I had spent my entire life proving myself worthy of being part of a family that had never wanted me. Then the call came. It was the hospital in Tahoe. Eleanor was awake. "She's asking for you," the nurse said. I called back immediately. Her voice was weak, but unmistakable. "They're punishing you," she said, "because you didn't stay small. But they can't destroy you unless you let them." I sat in silence. "Con le viengok," she added. "They hate that they can't price you, can't buy you, and they hate that you don't need them to shine." I exhaled, the kind of breath you only release when something inside you realigns. I thanked her, hung up. And then I stood. I called Clara, told her to get the legal team ready. We would prove that contract was a forgery, line by line, signature by signature. Then I reached out to a crisis PR firm in Charleston. If the world wanted a story, I'd give them one, but it would be mine and mine alone. No filtered photos, no captions dripping with guilt, just the truth. Before I left the office, I opened the wooden box again. This time, I took out the Edwardian necklace and clasped it behind my neck. I walked to the mirror. And for the first time in months, I didn't look for permission in my own reflection. I looked for clarity. And I found it. After Eleanor's call, the numbness finally lifted. I didn't waste time wallowing. I spread out every ledger, every invoice, every scanned document from the past 2 years, itemized, dated, and annotated. My name had been dragged through the dirt, and now I would clean it with facts. Clara connected me with a digital forensics firm in New York. They agreed to analyze the so-called Florence contract Lorelei had posted. The results came in within 4 days. The signature had been lifted from a different document. The timestamp used a font not available in the year it was supposedly signed. The metadata had been wiped, but sloppily enough for experts to trace the file's tampering. I published everything on the company website. A formal legal statement followed. We do not remain silent in the face of defamation. There was no dramatic flair, just clarity and backbone. Soon after, the Appraisal Association lifted its suspension. Instead of quietly filing the case away, they invited me to join a panel discussion on ethics and transparency in the art industry. I agreed on one condition: that my badge read Sarah Wadsworth, falsely accused, not falsely diminished. Then came the magazine interview. My PR firm arranged an exclusive feature with American collectors. I met the writer at a quiet cafe in Charleston. We spoke for hours. I told her about the room with the rose wallpaper, about my SAT scores tossed aside, about the sapphire necklace mistaken for costume jewelry, about Thanksgiving. But I wasn't telling my story just to clear my name. I was speaking to every person who'd been made invisible in the same way I had. The ones who succeed silently, who survive without applause, and whose loyalty is never returned. The interview went viral within a day. One collector sued Lorelei for misidentifying a Victorian painting. She'd appraised it as a reproduction. It turned out to be authentic and worth 50 times more. Her Instagram account vanished. Her website disappeared. Her business in Sacramento closed within the week. Then I received 2 letters, one from my father, the other from my mother. Both expressed remorse. Both said they'd reflected deeply and wanted to rebuild. But the phrases were too similar, too rehearsed. Clara searched email headers and found a thread from Lorelei to my mother, instructing them to write apology letters filled with emotional vocabulary to trigger guilt. I didn't respond. I forwarded all future contact to my lawyer. No more direct access. No more pretending. When Eleanor was discharged from the hospital, I flew to Tahoe. She was in a recovery center, sitting near a window when I arrived. She handed me a Regency mirror wrapped in silk. "Every time you question your worth," she said, "look into this. You are a jewel. And no one gets to price you based on their own brokenness." For the first time, I cried, not because I was hurt, but because I'd been seen. Back in Philadelphia, contracts trickled back in. Then they poured. A collector I'd worked with years ago reached out with a new $2 million project. I opened a second office in New Orleans, where I also agreed to teach a seminar on art, honor, and restoration. When I put the Edwardian necklace back on, it wasn't armor. It wasn't evidence. It was simply mine. Its value didn't come from who questioned it. Its value endured because I had. A year passed. I lived quietly in Charleston now, in a federal-style home with warped floorboards and crown molding that didn't quite match. I planted damask roses along the edge of the garden, just like the ones from my childhood wallpaper. I no longer woke up fearing whispers or articles or hashtags. I knew who stood with me, and I'd learned who simply stood in my light. To mark the year, I hosted a dinner. Just 3 guests: Clara, who stayed when my name was poison; Eleanor, who saw my worth long before I did; and Aunt Margaret, who'd quietly paid part of my college deposit when my acceptance letter went missing for weeks. We drank chilled white wine. Eleanor brought almond cake she baked that morning. She raised her glass to the jewels the world left behind. That night, I wrote a letter to my 10-year-old self. I didn't apologize to her. I told her, "You were never invisible. You were just surrounded by people too blind to see." I folded the note and placed it behind the mirror Eleanor gave me. It wasn't a monument. It was a promise. News came quietly, as it always does, when you've stopped looking. Lorelei had moved to a small town outside Oregon. She worked at a custom frame shop. She didn't post online anymore. She no longer mentioned auctions or heritage. She simply disappeared from the circles that once worshipped her. My parents sold the Tahoe house. The mortgage had lapsed, and they moved into a rented apartment in Nevada. No calls, no emails, no explanations. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt still. One morning in my reading room, I stood before the Regency mirror. The Edwardian necklace lay softly against my collarbone. I held a catalog in my hand for an exhibit I had curated, one that would open at the Metropolitan later that fall. I didn't adjust my hair. I didn't look for flaws. I just smiled. Not Serafina, the forgotten daughter in the rose room. Sarah, restored, refined, and no longer asking to be seen. She simply was. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come from strangers, but from the ones who sat at your table. And yet, healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. It means choosing peace over proving your worth. If this story moved you in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. And if you believe in stories that speak truth quietly, but fiercely, subscribe and follow this journey. Thank you truly for being here.